wonderful imposter syndrome. This is one that's frequently comes up, certainly with my clients, certainly with friends I speak to, myself back in the day. It's just one of those where obviously you're always telling yourself you're not going to be good enough or you're not worthy of something. And a lot of times, obviously, it's just based on unfactual evidence. Whether it's your ego looking to be comfortable, and then the comfort is telling yourself you're not good enough, so then you're going to start believing it. And obviously what we're looking to do is remove it, and or start certainly breaking it down so it's not as infectious and the suffering isn't so big. And a lot of examples you commonly come across is, as I said, like, I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve this success. And you look at them and you try and, I always find the key is to try and flip. Like, as I always say, like, the default setting is, if you're in a certain situation, what's the first thing that seems to come into your head? Where at the moment it seems like, I'm not good enough, whether it's in like sport or careers or certain whatever's happening in life, you just feel like you're not good enough, or this person's better than me, so they should have it, or I'm not as experienced as them, so they should have it. So automatically you're limiting yourself as well. And I've got a whole video on limiting beliefs, where again it's flipping the mindset and trying to get something that's more factual, something that's true, something that's more encouraging, that is actually going to want to encourage you to, when these thoughts come into your head, then you can start flipping them. So if you start questioning, like, I'm not good enough or I'm not experienced enough, it's like, well, who's saying that? Like, apart from you, is anyone else saying that? Like, who decided this? It's a time to question yourself and to put it back on yourself. It's like, well, I didn't decide that I'm not strong enough or experienced enough. I didn't decide that I'm not worthy enough of it. The imposter's always going to think that you're not good enough, worthy enough, strong enough. It's up to you then to decide and question that, and to make it feel uncomfortable from an ego perspective. Because ultimately the truth is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't go for something if you don't want to. It's like a double-edged sword. Like, well, how will you get experience if you don't start? If you're always holding yourself back, you're always going to put yourself in that loop where you're just not going to start anything. So it's the flip that you need to try and put on these things, in that, well, if I'm not experienced enough, well, how can I get experience? If I don't feel I'm good enough, well, what do I need to do to warrant kind of going for it, to feel that good enough approach? It's these little things where there's going to be an answer. It's not a place where you can just hold yourself down for the rest of your life, because no one's going to benefit from that. No one else is going to benefit from you putting yourself in that place. And ultimately, why not you? That's one of the key things where people say, well, this isn't for me. Well, why not? Like, why not me? Why don't I deserve to go for something like that? Why don't I deserve to be in a place like that? Again, it's just yourself, just bringing yourself down. And you think, well, if I'm not good enough, well, why not me? Why can't I be good enough? And then you just when you start to question those, that's when you start gaining some sort of power back, some sort of enthusiasm and encouragement to actually go and start trying to prove something right. And when I say prove something right, it's not proving other people wrong. There's no benefit to be had in that. It's to prove to yourself, right, that you are good enough for this stuff, that you are worthy enough to go for these things. There is something you can always offer that no one else can. I use an example that I have that often some of my clients are actually coaches as well. And the first thing that they say when they're qualifying is like, I don't think I'm going to be good enough, or there's so many more experienced people out there. And there's an example that I give that's powerful in a sense that, if I as a coach, I use the example as like, okay, so there's a room of 20 coaches. They're all very inexperienced. You get some that have been doing it for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, got massive success from it. So, well, if I put you there in your current way of thinking, like, how are you feeling? And a lot of times it's like, I'm just terrified. Just the anxiety is just like, I can feel it now. I just feel stressed. And there's just the limiting factors that start creeping in. So I say, okay, so what if I was to then, so we'll remove that. What if I was to say, you're going to go back in that same room, only this time, I'm telling you, you are good enough, you're just as good as someone that's been doing it for 20 years, it doesn't matter how many clients they have, you are just as good and just as successful and have the right just to be as successful as they do. How does that make you feel? And instantly there's relief. The anxiety's going, and there's possibility. And that's, I think, one of the key things. There's just a way forward. And it's like, well, that's good. All I've done is I've presented you with a circumstance that's just as true as the one telling yourself you're not good enough. And I think one of the key things there from a coaching perspective is, and it's the same with any aspect, I think, in whatever industry you're looking to go through and areas of life, there's only one version of you, and that's what people are going to be looking for, and that's the best version of yourself to give. Because there's only certain people are only going to be able to be helped by what you can give them. And I think as soon as people realise that as well, that lifts a barrier as well. And I use another example, if you've heard of Peter Crone, where he gave an example where he was helping a basketball player that suddenly from like free throw lines, his average was going from like, the league average was, say, I think like about 60% and he was shooting at only 30. And I think this person was just struggling, like he just felt like he was going to fail every time he was going up to shoot. And all he did was say to him like, well, what would you feel if I was to tell you that next time you go up, you're not going to miss the shot? That in your next throws, you're going to go back up to that average of 70%, really easy. And then I think the player's like, oh, I'd love to do that. And again, it's that example of like, well, I'm just presenting you with a narrative that's just as true as the one that you're trying to tell yourself that you're going to fail or you're not going to be good enough. So ultimately, it's just the perspective of what is truth and just not holding yourself back. And I think that's one of the keys to the imposter syndrome, is knowing that you're worthy of being there and you're deserving to be there just as much as anyone else. And it's the same when people say, well, when people are achieving things and they're feeling an imposter because they're actually achieving things, which is the whole loop conundrum thing in the first place. It's like, well, you're stressed about not deserving to be there, but then when you do get there, you start questioning that as well. And it's like, well, you deserve just as much as success as the next person. Why would you want to hold yourself back? There's no ego thing. There's a difference in being like humble and difference of celebrating your success, which we seem to be told we shouldn't be celebrating our success, which is completely false in and of itself. Like, you put the hard work in there. It's not a fluke that you got there. There's a reason why you're there in the first place. And then like, well, when you're going through it, like, well, what if people then often say, well, what if I fail? And like, well, what if you don't fail? And like, you hold on to that. And I ask the question again, people are like, well, what if I go for this and I fail? Instantly, the people are using that as an excuse to not go for something. Well, what if you don't fail? What if you actually succeed beyond your wildest dreams and you start getting the life you always wanted? Surely that is a bigger reason to go for something than to not go for anything at all. And if there is a failing that happens, well, they're just, as we always say, like, there's just lessons to be had from that. Lessons that you learn from to not do again, that then moves you on the right path till you find something that works. It's not the end of the world. The ego a lot of times just wants to be proven right and wants to be satisfied. While it's up for us to disprove that ego. It's up to us to take the actions and take the steps forward that we want to do, that benefits ourselves, and that's the way you start defeating the ego, you start defeating the imposter. It's just you taking the power with going, you are good enough. If I fail, so what? Like, I keep going, but what if I don't fail? I deserve just as much success as anyone else. And it's those little things that you use to, I guess, change your default setting, that you just flip on the positive each time. As soon as a negative comes in, okay, what's the positive? What's the fact here? And I know that's helped me sort of on my journey. And any times these kind of limiting beliefs, these imposter feelings come up, that you're able to just squash them quickly, because you're actually challenging them rather than letting them define you and own your process. And what that gives you from what the outcome is when you're beating your imposter syndrome, you're improving your self-worth, you're improving your confidence. Is every time you're backing yourself, and the more you back yourself each time, you get more and more confident, and eventually those limiting thoughts, those imposter syndrome thoughts, just become less and less, because you'll be able to just flip them really quickly. That after a while, it's almost like a weird way the ego just gives up trying to question or challenge you in that perspective. And then the confidence just becomes massively unshakable. You are then in control, you are the one that has the power. And I think then it improves your chances of being successful, because again, you're willing to go for stuff more often, because you're not holding yourself back as much, you're not feeling as much as an imposter. You're backing yourself each time, you're going for it more, so naturally the percentages are you're going to find success in the things that you're doing. And I think with that, I feel like it installs just a sense of freedom. And when I say freedom, it's just the less anxiety, it opens more possibility. You're free from the limiting thoughts, you open up the possibilities of things you've always wanted to do, and it gives you the mindset tools as well, just as I said, that you are in control, that when these things come up, you can change that default setting. I think then that's where a sense of freedom comes in as well, because you're not succumbing to your own limiting thoughts anymore, and all that time that's taken up with those thoughts are actually now being used for something more constructive, more positive, and more encouraging. So hopefully those kind of brief steps, those little mindset shifts, they're a starting point. As I said, there's so much more detail that you can go into, that as soon as you're aware of it, then you can start doing the detailed work that can go even further. And obviously, if you found this video helpful, just give it a like. Obviously subscribe, where you get more videos and alerts on things around the mindset. And as always, by all means, reach out if there's something you want to work on together. And yeah, I hope this video was quite useful.